Bonjour à tous, donc comme on vous l'a annoncé dans Axiom 13, il y a quelques semaines, Thibaut et moi avons eu la chance d'interviewer à la Sorbonne le plus grand philosophe moral, en tout cas le plus influent d'aujourd'hui, à savoir Peter Singer, au sujet de l'altruisme efficace. Donc c'est un événement organisé par Altruisme Efficace France, l'association, ainsi que par les éditions Les Arènes qui ont publié la traduction française du livre de Peter Singer. Donc un énorme merci à tous les organisateurs, je pense que pour Thibaut et moi c'était vraiment un privilège vraiment assez fou. Et sans plus tarder, voici le replay de cet événement.
Je suis Antonin Broy, doctorant en philosophie, et c'est avec grand plaisir qu'au nom de Sorbonne Université, je vous souhaite la bienvenue pour une conférence en présence du philosophe Peter Singer, à l'occasion de la parution en français de son livre « The Most Good You Can Do », traduit en français par l'altruisme efficace. Cette conférence a été organisée avec le soutien de l'UFR de philosophie de Sorbonne Université, de l'association Altruisme Efficace France et des éditions Les Arènes, et je tiens à tous les remercier chaleureusement. Peter Singer... Peter Singer, professeur de philosophie à l'université de Princeton et à l'université de Melbourne, a développé au fil des années une pensée profonde et originale. Celle-ci repose sur la tradition philosophique de l'utilitarisme, à partir de laquelle il entend fonder une éthique cohérente et intégrée, dont les implications sont à la fois séduisantes mais déroutantes. C'est donc un grand honneur de pouvoir l'accueillir ici. Merci Peter Singer. On peut l'applaudir. Les idées développées par Peter Singer ont des conséquences éminemment pratiques. Elles ont été une des sources d'inspiration d'un mouvement récent, celui de l'altruisme efficace, qui est progressivement arrivé en France pour donner naissance à l'association Altruisme Efficace France, dont l'événement de lancement, déjà en présence de Peter Singer, avait eu lieu à la Sorbonne il y a 2 ans. J'ai donc le plaisir de recevoir Olivier Bertrand, président et cofondateur d'Altruisme Efficace France, et qui s'est prêté à un entretien au sujet de l'altruisme efficace en France, que l'on peut trouver dans l'annexe de la version française du livre. Olivier, bienvenue. Et Laura Green, secrétaire générale et cofondatrice de l'association. Peut-on quantifier et mesurer l'impact positif que nous avons quand nous essayons d'aider les autres? Et si la réponse est positive, comment? Il s'agira donc d'établir un débat sur la manière dont Peter Singer conçoit l'altruisme et sa quantification. Et pour engager ce dialogue, et dans une optique de diffusion des savoirs auprès d'une audience plus large que la simple communauté philosophique académique, nous avons également invité 2 youtubeurs renommés dans le domaine de la philosophie et des sciences pour dialoguer avec Peter Singer. J'ai donc le plaisir d'accueillir Lee Nguyen Oang, polytechnicien et docteur en mathématiques, et dont la chaîne YouTube Science for All aborde des thèmes scientifiques, mais aussi philosophiques, par exemple sur les implications éthiques de l'intelligence artificielle. Lee, merci. Et Thibaut Giraud, docteur en philosophie, aussi connu sur YouTube sous le nom de Monsieur Phi, et dont les vidéos traitent de nombreux thèmes de philosophie, ayant trait notamment à l'utilitarisme. Thibaut, bienvenue. Sans plus tarder, je laisse la parole à Olivier Bertrand. Merci beaucoup.
Mesdames, Messieurs, chers amis, j'aimerais tout d'abord remercier Sorbonne Université, représentée ce soir par Antonin Broy, pour son invitation dans ce lieu prestigieux pour cette rencontre avec Peter Singer pour la parution tant attendue en français de The Most Good You Can Do, sous le titre « On ne peut mieux choisir » de l'altruisme efficace. Je remercie d'autant plus Sorbonne Université que, comme l'a évoqué Antonin, c'était déjà grâce au soutien de son UFR de philosophie qu'Altruisme Efficace France a pu faire ses premiers pas en public, il y a 2 ans, lors d'une conférence, ici même à la Sorbonne, en présence déjà de Peter Singer. qui avait accepté de parrainer notre lancement et de devenir membre d'honneur de notre association. Notre gratitude envers Peter Singer pour sa bienveillance et son soutien est bien évidemment immense. Et ce soir est pour moi une occasion de lui renouveler les chaleureux remerciements de toute notre équipe. Comme l'a également fait Antonin, j'aimerais remercier les éditions Les Arènes pour l'excellente collaboration qui a présidé à la préparation de cet événement, et nos deux youtubeurs, Thibaut Giraud, alias Monsieur Phi, et Lê Nguyen Wang, de Science for All, qui ont accepté de jouer le rôle d'intervieweur lors de la table ronde qui suivra l'intervention de Peter Singer. Nous sommes donc réunis ce soir autour de Peter Singer pour parler d'altruisme efficace. Alors, ce terme d'altruisme efficace peut intriguer. Il peut intriguer tout d'abord parce qu'intuitivement, on peut déceler une forme de tension entre les deux mots qui le composent. L'efficacité, c'est bien dans certains domaines, peut-être dans le monde de l'entreprise par exemple, mais veut-on vraiment parler d'efficacité s'agissant d'un sentiment humain qui nous pousse à désirer le bien d'autrui? Faut-il vraiment chercher à quantifier l'altruisme, pour reprendre la question posée dans le titre de cette conférence? Par ailleurs, on nous dit que l'altruisme efficace n'est pas seulement un ensemble d'idées, mais un mouvement. Alors, que doit-on penser d'un mouvement composé de personnes se regroupant volontairement sous ce terme, qui non seulement se déclarent altruistes, se décernant apparemment à elles-mêmes un brevet de moralité, mais qui en plus se déclarent efficaces, faisant ainsi, semble-t-il, l'affirmation les concernant d'une forme d'excellence? Il y a de quoi, vous en conviendrez, être quelque peu suspicieux. Pour essayer de vous rassurer, j'aimerais indiquer qu'une des caractéristiques les plus fréquentes parmi les personnes qui nous rejoignent pour réfléchir au sujet dont nous allons parler ce soir n'est pas de vouloir donner des leçons d'altruisme qui veut les entendre, mais plutôt de se poser des questions, souvent beaucoup de questions. Et que si par facilité on utilise parfois le terme d'altruiste efficace, il doit bien évidemment se comprendre comme personnes qui aspirent à être des altruistes efficaces. Alors, une des manières de présenter l'altruisme efficace est de dire qu'il s'agit d'une démarche qui vise à réfléchir de manière rationnelle aux meilleurs moyens d'aider les autres et à les mettre en œuvre de manière concrète. Mais réfléchir aux meilleurs moyens d'aider les autres peut mener à se poser des questions assez fondamentales. Tout d'abord, qui sont ces autres que nous souhaitons aider? Les êtres humains qui en ont le plus besoin, bien sûr, mais qu'en est-il par exemple des animaux? Y a-t-il des raisons valables de les exclure de notre cercle de considération morale, pour reprendre l'expression de Peter Singer? Qu'en est-il par ailleurs des individus, humains ou non humains, amenés à vivre à l'avenir, peut-être dans un avenir très lointain? De plus, qu'entend-on exactement par aider les autres? On a donc là une réflexion portant non seulement sur les moyens, c'est-à-dire relevant du domaine empirique, mais aussi plus fondamentalement sur les fins, c'est-à-dire relevant du domaine normatif. C'est là le domaine de la philosophie morale, dont Peter Singer est probablement le représentant contemporain le plus influent, et que vulgarise avec autant de talent Monsieur Phi, ainsi que Lê, qui, vous l'aurez compris, avec son point de vue de scientifique, porte un intérêt tout particulier à ces questions. Une fois mises de côté, je vous rassure, jamais pour très longtemps, ces questions philosophiques portant sur les fins, se posent donc des questions empiriques portant sur le monde qui nous entoure et notre capacité à agir sur lui. Ainsi, une cause donnée peut correspondre à un problème d'une très grande ampleur, au regard des fins que nous sommes fixés, mais est-ce suffisant pour décider que c'est à cette cause qu'il faut allouer nos ressources, qu'il s'agisse de ressources financières, ou de notre temps, ou de nos compétences? N'y a-t-il pas d'autres questions à se poser? Par exemple, cette cause est-elle négligée? Ou de vastes quantités de ressources lui sont-elles déjà allouées? Notre question qu'on peut être amené à se poser, quel est le degré de difficulté à apporter des solutions aux problèmes en question? Une cause peut être négligée, mais ce peut être pour de bonnes raisons. Peut-être n'y a-t-il aucun moyen d'action raisonnable à notre disposition. Et enfin, au vu des capacités dont je dispose, notamment lorsqu'il est question de mes compétences, suis-je comparativement bien placé pour résoudre ce problème? Alors ces questions sur les fins et ces questions empiriques ont des implications on ne peut plus concrètes. Selon les réponses qu'on y apporte, on peut conclure qu'il est souhaitable, par exemple, de consacrer ces ressources à traiter le paludisme ou d'autres maladies, au moyen des méthodes les plus éprouvées, ou à améliorer le sort des dizaines de milliards d'animaux terrestres, sans parler des animaux marins, élevés et abattus dans des conditions épouvantables chaque année, ou encore à réduire, ne serait-ce que de manière très faible, la probabilité d'une catastrophe globale mettant en péril la vie sur Terre, dû par exemple à certains risques posés par des technologies émergentes comme l'intelligence artificielle ou la biologie de synthèse. Je vous rassure, les choix multiples sont autorisés. Se poser ces questions peut s'avérer tout à fait vertigineux, mais également passionnant. Et pour y réfléchir, quoi de mieux qu'une communauté de personnes qui partagent ce même désir d'aider les autres et ces mêmes questionnements? C'est cet espace d'échange et de coordination que l'altruisme efficace en général et Altruisme efficace France en particulier cherche à offrir. Peter Singer, au début de sa carrière, bien avant que le terme d'altruisme efficace n'ait été inventé, s'est lui-même posé ces questions. Comme il le raconte dans son livre, au chapitre « Choisir les causes et les organisations », en 1972-73, j'ai traité de deux causes distinctes, la pauvreté mondiale, dans famine, richesse et moralité, et le traitement réservé aux animaux, dans la libération animale. Ce n'étaient pas les seuls problèmes à l'époque. La guerre du Vietnam n'était pas terminée, et la menace d'un conflit nucléaire entre l'Union soviétique et les États-Unis ne pouvait être ignorée. Au service de quelle cause devais-je mettre mon temps, mon énergie et mes compétences? Je ne me demandais pas laquelle était la plus urgente, ni même quel était le problème le plus important à résoudre. J'ai plutôt cherché où je pourrais le mieux faire changer les choses. Et j'ai décidé que c'était dans le domaine de la souffrance animale. Alors que beaucoup d'écrivains très doués faisaient déjà campagne à propos de la pauvreté dans le monde, de la guerre du Vietnam et du désarmement nucléaire, très peu de gens réfléchissaient au statut moral des animaux, pour prôner en la matière un changement radical. Je viens de citer ce passage de Peter Singer qui donne un aperçu qui me semble particulièrement intéressant de la manière de penser à laquelle nous invite l'altruisme efficace, s'agissant en l'occurrence de choix de carrière. Il est grand temps que je lui cède la parole. Mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, Peter Singer.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for your remarks, Anton as well. I want to thank also, of course, the publishers for making this book possible in France. I'm delighted that it's now accessible to French readers. And I'm very grateful for all of you for turning up in this splendid room to listen to us discuss this issue and hopefully ask your questions as well. Is that still working? Yes, okay. Now, I've got some slides. As you know, we had some technical issues with the slides. Okay, we're getting towards them, I think. So let me say, okay, we're not there yet. Let me say that what I will start by talking about is firstly, what is effective altruism? I think Olivier has already said something in connection with that. Effective altruism is an idea, and it's also a social movement. So the idea is that one of our aims in life ought to be to try to make the world a better place, to be altruistic, to think of others, and therefore to work towards improving the world. But it's not enough simply to say, I want to make the world a better place. The effective part of effective altruism is about the idea that when we do that, whatever it is that we are doing to try to make the world a better place, whether that is donating money to non-profit organizations or volunteering our time and our energy and our skills towards that, whatever it is that we're doing, we want to get the best value for what we're doing. We want to do the most good that we can. Not just make the world a little bit better, if in fact for the same kind of commitment, for the same kind of financial resources or time, we could do more good than that. Then the effective altruism movement says that's what we want to do. We want to do as much good as we can, and essentially it's saying it's a waste if we don't do that. If we're putting in resources, why not do as much good as we can rather than just do some good? So that's really the essential idea of effective altruism, and in one way it seems very simple and very obvious, yet at the same time it's not the way most people think about altruism or philanthropy or supporting charities. Most people think that this is a matter of doing something with your heart. And of course it is, in part, a matter of doing something with your heart. But if you don't use your head as well, you are going to end up perhaps doing no good at all, or at least doing less good than you might have been able to do. And so that's why the effective altruism movement is focusing on being effective. So that's the idea of effective altruism. But effective altruism is also now a name for a social movement, a movement that is about 10 years old. It doesn't go back very far, when people started thinking about how to make, about how we could actually start to assess the effectiveness of what we're doing and how important this is to encourage people to do that. So that's really what I want to talk about today. It looks like we still haven't got any slides up. So, okay, never mind. We'll forget about the slides, I think. We can cope without that. Technology is a great thing when it works, but you don't want to become dependent on it because every now and again it lets you down. Okay, so I said that effective altruism is concerned with making the world a better place. But you might ask, what do I mean by making the world a better place? And that's clearly a question of values. It's a question of saying, what is better here? Now, we could have a long discussion about values, but I'll try to keep it reasonably short and simple. I think there are some things that we can probably find agreement on, that the world will be a better place if there is less unnecessary suffering, right? Less pointless suffering. We can't abolish all suffering. We are so constructed that if we don't feel pain, for example, then we will end up hurting ourselves. We won't realize that we've put our hand on something that is very hot and is burning. So we need to have, we can't avoid some pain. But there is a lot of suffering in the world, a vast amount of suffering in the world that is not at all necessary. And so one of the things effective altruists agree on is let's try to reduce this amount of suffering. In addition to agreeing on the importance of reducing suffering, effective altruists will also agree that premature death is generally a bad thing. So, for example, if we learn that there are children dying from preventable diseases, then trying to stop that, trying to prevent those children dying, is a good thing to do. So those are a couple of key values that effective altruists talk about. Another important aspect of these values is that effective altruists want to see these values instantiated globally, not just locally. So effective altruists, for example, will not accept the argument that we should try to reduce suffering here, wherever we might be, here in Paris, here in France, here in Europe. They will take the view that suffering is a bad thing, and if there are similar kinds of suffering, similar going on, whether that is happening in France or whether that is happening on the other side of the world in a developing country, those things are equally bad. And if we can prevent them, we should do so wherever they are. And that's relevant because very often, as I'll explain, we can do more good by preventing things in countries that are far from us, assuming we are living in one of the affluent countries of the world, than if we do them closer to home. Okay, so those are some values. Now you might say, well, this sounds like a kind of utilitarianism, right? This sounds like the ethical theory that was developed first in a clear form by Jeremy Bentham in England at the end of the 18th century, and developed by later utilitarians like John Stuart Mill. And certainly that is a tradition in which I include myself. I do think that essentially this is the right way to look at ethics. But not everyone in the effective altruism movement is a utilitarian. You don't have to be a utilitarian. I think the reverse does hold. I think if you're a utilitarian, you ought to be, consistently, if you're consistent, you ought to be an effective altruist. Oh, we've got some slides. Okay, good. So let's move on. I've gone past this. Next one we've seen. Whoops. Okay, hold it. Yes. Okay, that one you've seen. Let's go to the next one. Right. This is where we are now. Good. So, what about these principles that I talk about here, like equality, fairness, justice? So, utilitarians will say, those ideas are good because they lead to better consequences. But they're not absolute. Sometimes you ought to do an injustice, or you ought to break what is otherwise an important moral rule because of the much better consequences that will occur if you do that. But of course there are some people who don't think that. There are some people who think, no, there are some principles or rights that should never be violated. Well, does that stop you being an effective altruist? I don't think it does, because it's very rare that even a utilitarian would say you ought to violate these rules. Consider, for example, the rule that many people believe that you should never kill an innocent person. You should never kill an innocent human being. Well, how often could it be the case that you'll do more good by killing an innocent human being? I don't think I've ever been in that situation in the 70-odd years that I've lived. And most of you, I think, will never be in that situation. So even if I did believe in that rule, as an absolute rule, which would mean I would not be a utilitarian, I could still be just as effective an altruist as I've been, because my support for that rule would not have got in the way of my effective altruism. So that's why, as I say, effective altruists do not have to be utilitarians. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so now I want to talk about effectiveness and why, as I say, good intentions are not enough. Because a lot of people think that to be a good person, it's your intentions that really matter. I think it's tremendously important to consider what results you're bringing about and to direct your actions to bring about the most important results. Next slide. Okay, so this is this is an example of why it's very important. So on the left here, you have, okay, on the left here, you have a picture of a person with a guide dog, a blind person with a guide dog. Now, many people think this is a good charity to support. It's very good that people who are blind have the assistance of a dog to help them get around. And I think it is good. In general, it's better if people who are blind have some assistance like that. But it's actually quite expensive to train a guide dog and to train the person, the blind person, to work with the guide dog. It takes skilled people, trained people to do this, many hours. And it's been estimated that the cost of doing this is a United States estimate, is about $40,000, okay, to give one guide dog to one blind person. Now, if you look at this slide, this is a clinic that is treating children to prevent them getting trachoma in North Africa, obviously in French North Africa. So trachoma is the leading cause of preventable blindness in the world. More people go blind from trachoma than from any other preventable cause. But it's quite inexpensive to prevent. Estimates say it might cost as little as $25 per case of blindness prevented. Let's say that's too low. It's some years old, that estimate. So let's say it's $100 that it costs. Even so, you can see that for $40,000, you could prevent 400 cases of blindness. So that's what the people on the right-hand side of the previous slide were representing. You could give one blind person a guide dog, or for the same amount of money, you could prevent 400 people becoming blind. Well, I think it's pretty obvious which is the better thing to do. Because it would be better to cure the blind person's blindness altogether or to prevent that blind person becoming blind, than to provide a guide dog. So it's at least 400 times as good. Arguably, it's more than that because of how much better it is. So if you don't think about this, you'll be using your resources to help one person rather than to make a bigger improvement in the lives of 400 people. And isn't that a terrible waste of resources if there are 399 people whom you haven't helped and only one whom you have helped when you could have helped all 400? Next. So this is the person, I owe this example to Toby Ord, who you see in this slide. He's the one who thought about what would be the most good he can do with money that he could save if he lived inexpensively and donated everything he had above that limit to an effective charity. And as you can see here, he pledged to live, this was a few years ago, and this is cost of living adjusted, but he pledged to live on about 20,000 euros a year. This is what he was living on when he was a graduate student at Oxford, and he thought he was doing okay. So even though he knew he was going to get an academic job and have an academic career, he thought, I'll keep living on that, or I'll keep living on the inflation-adjusted figure, and I'll give the rest away to the most effective charity I could find. And then he asked himself, and how many people could I help if I did that? And he did a complicated calculation of what he might earn and what he would save and what he would have left over. And he came up with the figure of 80,000 people. He could prevent 80,000 people becoming blind if he used his savings to donate to an effective charity preventing trachoma. So it's his example, and he went on to found, as I say here, Giving What We Can, which was really, I think, the first effective altruism organization that was not only encouraging people to give, but also encouraging them to give as effectively as possible. Next slide. But then other people started doing even more rigorous research into finding the best charities. And two people who were working at a hedge fund and wanted to give money away were dissatisfied with the amount of information they could get about which were the best charities. So they set up this organization called GiveWell, and GiveWell now employs, I think, about 15 or 20 people who are full-time researching the best charities. And as you can see here, they're very rigorous. The circle, the pie chart, represents all the charities they've considered, and the little orange slice is the ones that they're recommending. That doesn't mean that the others are not doing good. What it means is there is not sufficient evidence that they are doing good. They may be doing good, they may not be doing good. There just isn't the evidence to tell. But there's a small segment where there is very clear evidence, conclusive evidence, that they are doing a lot of good and they are doing it very cost effectively. So that's what GiveWell has come up with. Next slide. There's also an organization that I've set up, although I'm not now running, called The Life You Can Save, which was a growth out of a book that I wrote with that title that I published in 2009. It does the same. So if you want to look at recommended organizations, go to those two websites, givewell.org or thelifeyoucansave.org, and you'll find some recommendations. Next. Okay, so how do we decide which causes we should choose? I've been talking about global poverty so far, but there are a lot of different kinds of issues we could work on. How should we decide what those should be? So effective altruists typically talk about these three things: scale, the size of the problem; neglectedness, how many people are working on it; and tractability, that is it soluble? Can you at least make progress? Is this an area where you can contribute something important? So, next. So, if we look at this in connection with smallpox eradication, which I want to mention as an example of an effective action to reduce suffering. So in 1958, we go back to 1958, when smallpox was a major problem. It had estimated to have killed 150 million people in the 20th century. That's more people than in the two great world wars. Far more people had died from smallpox in that 20th century. So it was a very big problem. The scale was there. It was, on a global scale, it was neglected. There were regional efforts in particular places, but it was not being tackled globally. And yet there was effective and inexpensive vaccination available. So what happened? Well, there was, next slide, there was an effort from the World Health Organization, led by this man, Donald Henderson, to actually eradicate smallpox altogether. And that goal was achieved in less than 20 years. 1977, you see Donald Henderson, he was honored for this. He's getting his Presidential Medal of Freedom there. But actually, there was another person who was even more important, that is really unheralded. Next. And that's Viktor Zhdanov, who was a Soviet Deputy Minister for Health at the time in the USSR, and who had a background in disease control, particularly in this area, and who conceived the idea that smallpox could be eradicated. No disease had ever been completely eradicated at that stage. And he conceived that idea, he pushed it through his role in the Soviet Union, he pushed it at the World Health Organization, and that really set up the effort, which Donald Henderson effectively led. So according to Will MacAskill, who's another of the leading effective altruists, this man has probably done more good than any other human being we know about, because otherwise smallpox would have continued, that very large death toll and a pretty horrible disease as well. So, we don't know a lot about his motivation, but we do know that he did an immense amount of good, and that's really what effective altruists want to be thinking about. Now, you might say, well, okay, but smallpox has been eradicated now. What are the other opportunities? Let's have a look. Next. So, again, we want to focus on making the biggest reduction in suffering that we can, make the biggest difference we make to do the most good. Next. So here's the top-rated organization from GiveWell, the Against Malaria Foundation. It's distributing these bed nets, you can see in the blue plastic bags, that children are taking home, and it's been clearly demonstrated that distributing bed nets in places that have malaria saves the lives of children who would otherwise die from malaria. It's mostly children who die, and also reduces the incidence of malaria. So it's a highly effective treatment. I'm giving signals that I'm running out of time, but let's go to the next. So I just want to, I'll say a little bit about animal suffering and then I'll stop, and I hope we'll cover other things in questions. Olivier mentioned animal suffering as another concern. Let's have next. And again, the scale is simply huge. The scale is vastly larger even than things like smallpox. Something like 65 billion animals, land vertebrate animals, killed for food, reared and killed for food each year. I was having lunch today with my publisher and with Mathieu Ricard, who wrote the preface to this book, and he was saying, well, what about sea animals as well? We shouldn't really only consider land animals. Fish clearly can feel pain, and if you include the number of fish, then every 2 months, human beings are killing as many animals as the number of humans who have ever existed on this planet. Because it's been estimated that there are about 108 billion human beings who, since the emergence of our species, have existed. And that's 108 billion is about as many vertebrate animals that we're killing every 2 months for food. So it's a vast problem. It is very neglected compared to problems about humans. Lots of people say, oh, we should focus on solving human problems before we get to animal problems. But I think that that's a prejudice. I think suffering is suffering. You can consider how much animals suffer, but if they do suffer, then I think the suffering needs to be weighed along with similar sufferings of humans. And there is evidence that we can reduce this amount of suffering. That there have been campaigns that have been highly effective in terms of reducing animal suffering. Next slide. And yet the money that is going to reduce animal suffering is grossly misdirected. What you see on the left is the number of animals killed. This is just in the United States, so it's really just talking about land animals now, in farming, for food, in other words. And that's the blue square. And then the tiny little yellow square is the number of animals killed in laboratories. And you can't even really see it, but there's little stripes of color for animals killed in shelters, like dogs and cats, and for clothing, basically for fur. So that's the number of animals killed. Then you look at the right-hand box, and that's the amount of money that is donated to the different areas. So you see that overwhelmingly the money is going to animals in shelters, to dogs and cats, because people care about dogs and cats. And only very little of it is going to farm animals, which are overwhelmingly the majority of the animal suffering. So again, it's another example of not thinking effectively about how to reduce suffering, of doing, if you like, too much with our hearts because we care about cats and dogs, and not enough really thinking about, well, pigs and chickens and cows are also capable of suffering. Now, I think I'm out of time, right? So I should really stop. I think probably it's best that we do stop and we go to the discussion, and then we'll come back to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this great introduction. I'm going to start with maybe a tough question. Like in science, we really value the scientific consensus. So how consensual or controversial are your ideas or like effective altruism ideas within the philosophical community?
So philosophy doesn't exactly value consensus, because philosophy, you know, we are always trying to find reasons to disagree with somebody. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to write your article and get it published somewhere if you're just saying, well, I agree with the excellent views expressed by so-and-so. But I think there is, you know, as I was trying to say, I think there is consensus that suffering is in itself a bad thing. I don't think, you know, there's not 100% maybe, but very few people would disagree with that. But I think there's probably not consensus on the idea of regarding all suffering, you know, whether it happens here in France or in some other country, as equally putting a demand on us to act. So one of the differences is that there are people who think we have special obligations to citizens of our own country or members of our local community, and that they can outweigh the obligations to distant strangers, even if, as in the example of the guide dog, even if I could help 400 times as many people in the distant country.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question, which is, how do you see this thing moving? Like, do you think there's going to be, in the future, more philosophers leaning towards effective altruism? Or?
Well, I certainly hope that will be the case. It's a little hard always to predict the directions of currents of ideas, but as I said, this movement is only 10 years old, and during that time there's been a very considerable increase in the amount of discussion of the idea, and that already shows that people find the ideas interesting, whether they agree with them or not. They think that they're worth discussing. And yeah, if I had to guess at tendencies, I would say we will get more agreement towards this area. I mean, it's somewhat similar to the issue of animals. When I first got interested in this over 40 years ago, very few people were discussing it at all, and some people just thought the idea was ridiculous, that we should give equal consideration to the suffering of animals. But now there's quite a lot of excellent philosophers who accept that, and the discussion has moved on to other particular topics. But I think, you know, while again, not everybody accepts it, but there are many more people who regard that as a serious and important view.
Thank you. Now I want to move beyond the philosophical community. Like, it seems to me that perhaps not people in this room, but like most people in most citizens, like perhaps are not really effective altruists. Like they perhaps care about well, people near them, or like they don't, or maybe they care about some moral rules rather than the consequences. Would you argue that perhaps if they thought longer about this problem, they would change their mind?
Well, I think it's not just thinking longer. Perhaps it's thinking in a particular way, in trying to put yourself really in the position of other people, which of course is a very ancient idea, the sort of golden rule idea that you shouldn't do to others as you wouldn't have them do to you, and not just that you shouldn't do, but also you shouldn't leave others in a situation that you wouldn't like to be left in if the roles were reversed. And I think that is a pretty fundamental part of ethics, and I think if people really reflect on that and think carefully about what biases they might have, what prejudices we might have that lead us to focus more on those who are close to us, yeah, then I would hope that more people would accept this idea that we ought to be equally concerned about everyone's suffering.
So you would argue that basically, like psychology shows that we have a lot of biases, of cognitive biases, and so like these influence the way we think about moral. And so, like, would you argue that like if people thought longer about these, like try to correct for these biases, like perhaps like effective altruism would be more popular? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's a bit of a longer story, but I think we have biases that are part of our evolutionary heritage, coming from when we lived in small face-to-face societies, maybe 100, maybe 200 people, and we knew all the people that we could see, and we would help them if they were in need. but we didn't think about people in other communities, and of course we didn't think about people far away because we couldn't help them. So we have kind of evolved an idea of helping the people we know. Now we live in a world in which we can help people we don't know, but we haven't developed that kind of emotional attachment to doing that in the same way. So I think people need to think about this and think about whether that's really a sufficient reason for not caring about people, or whether it's rather a bias we should overcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your book. It's a very inspiring book, and I hope a lot of readers in France will be inspired too. And it seems that there are two ways of understanding the moral intuition behind effective altruism. The modest interpretation is the following one. Being altruist as much as you can do is good, and it is even better to choose the most effective forms of altruism. Therefore, it's good to learn more about the impact of what you give and give accordingly, etc. So this view is not so controversial, but it is also not very compelling, because saying that an action is good or that an action is better than another one does not mean that not doing this action or preferring the other action is morally wrong. In fact, anyone would agree that giving 10% of his revenue is a good action, but it is much harder to admit that it is morally wrong to give less than 10%. And that brings me to the hard and more controversial understanding of this moral intuition behind effective altruism. The idea would be that not being altruist as much as you can and not choosing the most effective form of altruism is morally wrong. And so just as wrong as if I had let people die in front of me, which is wrong. It is much more radical and hard to accept, but if accepted, this view is much more compelling. And so my question is, do you actually take such a hard stance in your book, or do you defend a more moderate and intermediate position?
Well, I do think that there's a sense in which it's wrong not to, so let's say first, assume that I'm addressing people who are at least middle class in an affluent country, right? So I'm not talking about people who are very poor, even here in France. But if you're middle class or above in France, then I think you have resources to spare that you could use to help people. And I do think that if you're not doing anything significant to help people in greater need, or using your resources for some other purpose, which you might try to argue is just as good or just as important, that's a discussion you could have. But if you're not doing any of that, then I think you're not living a fully ethical life, right? Let me put it that way. It's not necessarily, I'm not going to say you're a terrible person. I think that would be too strong. But I think, sometimes rather than just black and white idea of right and wrong, we should think of morality as on a continuum. And if you're not doing something to help people in need or something comparably significant, well, you're certainly not really right over on the best end of that spectrum. You're somewhere towards the other side of it, but not all the way down. But certainly not where I think you would be if you were really an ethical person.
Yes, on several occasions in the book, I noticed that you say something like, effective altruists are not perfect. They are somewhere in the middle between like a minimal ethical life and a maximal ethical life. You're saying something like that. And could you tell us more about those two extremes? Where do you draw the line? So you draw the line for minimal ethical life, I think, but what would be this maximal ethical life?
Well, the maximal ethical life, I do mention in the book some examples of people who I think are very close to maximal ethical life. I talk about Zell Kravinsky, who's an American who had a talent for investing successfully in real estate, made about $40 million, and then decided that the money could do more good if he gave it away to various causes. So he kept a modest amount for his family and his children, put a little bit in trust, but gave overwhelmingly the majority of the $40 million away. And then he realized that he lived in a suburb of Philadelphia. He realized that there are people who are suffering from kidney disease in Philadelphia who are waiting for years in the hope of getting a kidney transplant because there's a long waiting list and a shortage of organs. And he learnt that for a healthy person to donate a kidney carries only a very small risk of harm. He said 1 in 4,000 chance that you will die because you only have 1 kidney rather than 2. That was his estimate. So he went to a hospital in a suburb of Philadelphia, an area of Philadelphia that mostly serves African Americans and poorer people, and he said he wanted to donate a kidney to the next person on the waiting list. The hospital at first sort of sent him for psychiatric testing, but eventually he convinced them that he was serious and sane, and he did that. So, you know, to me, Zell is very close to that end where he's living a fully ethical life, and I don't really expect many people to do that. I still have 2 kidneys myself. So, you know, I don't think we should expect effective altruists to be saints in that way. But that's, you know, if you ask where is the top end of that scale, it's somewhere like that.
So I have a question that is related to effective altruism. It's something about one of the most famous arguments you gave in your work, in your philosophical work. It's well, I could use the drowning kid argument, but I prefer a variation that is less famous but very good. It's the Bugatti argument. Would you actually have the text here if you want me to read it, or maybe you can sketch it yourself? It's a striking argument.
I can sketch it, okay. And I should say that I owe this to another American philosopher called Peter Unger. Comes from him originally. So there is a man, Bob I think is his name, and he's retired. He doesn't have a lot of valuable assets. But he has a love of old vintage cars, and he's invested his savings in a very rare vintage Bugatti, you know, famous Italian make of car, rare and worth quite a lot. And if he didn't have those savings, well, he could still survive because he would get Social Security, but his retirement would be much less secure. But he likes to drive the Bugatti. He likes cars so much he wants to take it for a drive now and again, and he can't get it insured because the insurance companies won't touch it. So he parks it one day, he takes it for a drive, and he parks it near the end of a disused railway line and goes for a walk along the railway line. And at one point he gets to a junction in the railway line where the track divides. You're probably familiar with versions of this trolley problem, as it's called. Some of you are. So the track is dividing there, and as he looks up the main line, the undivided line, he sees a runaway train coming down this track. Somehow it's got away, there's no driver in it, and he looks there's a switch at the junction, he looks the way the switch is set, so it's set for it to continue down the line, and further down that line there is a child who's playing on the line. And the child is too far away for him to shout out and warn the child. So if he does nothing, the train will go down the line and probably kill the child. But there's one thing that he can do, and that is throw the switch, and then the train will run down the disused line that he was walking up. And you can guess what's going to happen. At the end of that line, there is his car, and the train won't be able to stop, there's no driver, it will crash through the end of the line and destroy his Bugatti. So the question is, what should Bob do, right? Would he be, suppose you say he sees this situation and he says, well, my Bugatti is my most precious possession, I'm not going to pull the switch, I'm going to let the train kill the child. Would Bob be a bad person? Maybe let's have a show of hands. Would Bob be a bad person if he doesn't pull the switch? Okay, most of you say yes. Good, I'm pleased by that. You have good instincts here. But think what you've just committed yourself to. You've committed yourself to saying, if you can save a life by donating or destroying your most precious possession, which is also your retirement security, you should do so. Well, not many people. That goes a long way towards what effective altruists would do. It's probably more saintly than most effective altruists.
So I want to talk about moral debating, because I've tried to organize debates, and sometimes I debate with him, and it's hard. And it's usually hard to debate about morals, like people are very attached to their moral values. So do you have advice? I'm sure you had a lot of experience doing this. Would you have advice about how to better debate?
Well, I think some of the most interesting moral debates are a little bit like your example, the Bob and Bugatti example that I just gave, where you get people to examine their own judgments, their own attitudes, and they start to see inconsistencies or paradoxes. So on the one hand, probably before you heard that example, most of you would not have condemned a person who kept his retirement savings, even though he'd received a letter from an aid agency saying that by donating your retirement savings to us, you can certainly save one life, maybe more than one life. But now I think you have to think either you voted the wrong way, which I hope you won't conclude in that example, or you should donate your retirement savings to the organisation, or you've got to find some other explanation as to why the cases are different, okay? And that's obviously a lot of interest then. People will come up with explanations for why the cases are different, and then you can have a debate about whether they're good explanations or not good explanations.
So your advice is use a lot of thought experiments, right?
Yeah, I think thought experiments are useful for eliciting people's moral judgments, sometimes in ways that they themselves don't really expect.
Another thing I noticed in your book is that you talk a lot about like how good it feels to be an effective altruist. You're really positive in the book, like you're not blaming anyone, you're not saying people are bad. There's no Bob. And is it like a communication strategy on your end? Like, do you think it's more convincing to present things like this?
Well, I also think it's true, otherwise I wouldn't be saying it, right? And there is actually, there is good research showing that people who are generous and help others are more satisfied with their life. They feel that their lives are going better. And it seems there's also some research that suggests that this is not simply a correlation, but that it is causation from donating or helping others to feeling better about yourself. That part of the research is less strong, I must admit, but it seems to be there.
Just one quick question. One could argue that empathy-based altruism actually makes more happier than effective altruism in that regard.
Empathy-based altruism, you mean helping people?
Purely empathy, because there are a lot of things against empathy actually in your book.
It's possible. One could argue that. I haven't seen research specifically on that topic, but it's possible that that's true. But I think we need to also have larger purposes, and thinking of trying to make the world a better place is obviously a large purpose. And my guess is that that is something that contributes to fulfillment in the sense that you're living a worthwhile life. That is, it produces a harmony between your values and your actions that I think is greater than if you merely give to those with whom you have particular empathy.
So I have so many more questions, but we're running out of time. So I want to ask a few questions about Effective Altruism France, Altruisme Efficace France. Do I remember the question? So one of the question is, how do you determine the best charities to give to? Like, is there something like that Effective Altruism France is doing?
Yeah, so I agree that there's many different sources of information that people can use, We've seen with Peter Singer that there are several organizations such as GiveWell and animal charity evaluators who discuss animal welfare and find out the best charities to help out animals. So it actually can be a bit confusing because these are two organizations, meta organizations, trying to give out information about where to best allocate your resources, your time and your money. But there are many more organizations, even in the effective altruism, even within the effective altruism movement, such as, for example, 80,000 Hours trying to discuss career changes, because we've been discussing a lot donations and where to best allocate your money, but you can also think about where to donate your time and your career. And so this is another source of possible information for people who are trying to donate money, to donate their resources, so time or money. And in this way, we have a whole ecosystem of organizations trying to give out information about how to allocate your resources. And this is all in English. This is all geared towards an English-speaking audience. In France, we're trying to give out a little bit of this information. On our website, we're starting, or we will start soon, to have information trying to take the most relevant aspects of all these organizations and what they have to share to help donors make better decisions. But we would encourage people who are interested in these ideas to start looking at the English-speaking world as well, because there's quite a lot of information there.
Okay, so unfortunately, there's not yet a French GiveWell. So you have these. So the question is like maybe you can just give directly to these guys. Like, why would we have to go through France? Like, is there a point to go through France? Through French organizations?
No, so you're right, and there is currently, unfortunately, not a French GiveWell or a French animal charity evaluators. So first is those meta-organizations can also evaluate, it's possible, organizations that are located in France. Actually, it's a bit theoretical. Only one organization until now has been evaluated, which is L214, sorry, which was distinguished as a standout charity by animal charity evaluators, but that's really the exception until now. So really, it's a matter of uncertainty and how you deal with uncertainty. On the one hand, you look at GiveWell, you look at animal charity evaluators or others, and it's really helpful to reduce uncertainty to look at their analysis and their assessments. Now, on the other hand, you may have some information about some organizations located in France. One piece of information that we can provide as Altruisme Efficace France is, for example, this organization actually operates in a field with a type of intervention that is deemed to be effective by those meta-organizations. So, for example, if you're going to work on trachoma, you have some organizations in France who work on that, preventing blindness. So you at least know that this organization works in a field that is supposed to be effective, and its methods are supposed to be effective. So you already reduce the amount of uncertainty. Another thing is, of course, there's an incentive to give in France because the French taxation is pretty much allows you to give 3 euros for the price of 1. So that you have that leverage also that you can take into account in your calculus. And finally, of course, individually, you might have more knowledge. You might have some additional knowledge about a given French organization located in France. If you take all of that together, it might be rational in some cases to give to a French organization, but it's really a personal call. The only thing we do is we try to provide info and advice to help people make that decision.
Well, I was going to say thank you very much, but you want to add something?
I think I've been told we don't have that much time because of the technical issues at the beginning for questions from the public. Maybe we'll take 1 or 2. Yeah, just to maybe a few more.
Maybe a few more.
Okay, we'll take a few questions from the public. Yeah.
Maybe 4.
4. Okay, 4. So the lucky 4 people, please put your hands up if you have a really interesting short question.
Yes, good evening. I think I would like to say something because I am benevolent in an organization for blind people in France. And there is an organization in France which is called the Comité de la Charte, which evaluated, which give criteria for those charity organizations. There are to the best of my knowledge, there are 75 organizations, blind people, cancer. It has been, this Comité de la Charte has been created after the scandal of the Association pour la Recherche contre le Cancer in 91. And then we are under scrutiny we have someone coming to us 2 or 3 months per year, and controlling that the money we are given is employed in the social goal and not spent in cars and so on and so on. Then that is, I think, if someone wants to donate some money in France, I think it's a good criteria to look if the organization is member of the Comité de la Charte.
Thank you very much for that comment. I think obviously I agree that if you're going to give to a charity, you don't want to give to one that is spending most of its revenues on luxury cars or building houses for the director or things of that sort. There are a small number of charities that are frauds, and every now and again one of them hits the newspapers. As you said, you've had such scandals here. And they can be avoided. But still, what this kind of auditing does really is only to show that the money is being used for the professed purposes of the organization. It still doesn't compare the effectiveness of that spending as against something else. And that's, I think, what organizations like GiveWell and the Life You Can Save are trying to do. And it adds, I think, an important additional information that we should have.
Thank you. I have a question going back to your argument about blind people and the guide dog. If we take that reasoning a bit further down, would you argue that would be, for example, good policy if for a country in Western Europe or in North America to take all its money, all it can invest in health in its own country, to stop investing in health in its own country because the health system is so expensive, and to pour all this money in other countries where health is cheaper and where saving a life is cheaper than saving it in the US or in France. So in short, would you agree that it's more moral to just stop curing people here and just taking the whole system down to pour that money where it's cheaper? Thank you.
Well, I would agree that it would be the right thing for a government to do if the government had an electorate that was sufficiently moral itself to recognize that it was better to help people wherever they are, and therefore that it was wrong to spend large sums on complex operations, let's say, in your own country, when you could use that money to save many lives elsewhere. But without an electorate that shares that view, this government isn't going to last very long. So it may do good for a short time, but it's not sustainable. And unfortunately, I don't know of any country where the electorate would be prepared to vote such a government back into power once they'd done that. So that's why I think we really need to try to change people's ideas and to change it more gradually. As you were saying, one of your questions, I'm suggesting people move gradually to do more, to give a little more, but not that we can expect people at one go to do everything like the person I mentioned, Zel Kravinsky, and similarly I don't think we could expect a government to do that in one leap, even if, you know, it might, in theory, be a good thing to do.
Hi, good evening. So thank you for your intervention tonight. And I was wondering, I feel like I'm more at the lower level of the altruistic spectrum. So I'm trying, like, every day, not trying to save people, but just not kill any individual, whether they're animal or human. So I was wondering, what would be do you have any suggestions or advice to give us on, you know, how to be more altruistic in the daily life, like in the way we consume, we buy products, and trying to buy products that don't kill anybody, or, you know?
Yes, well, I certainly think that you've made a significant start if you've decided to avoid supporting with your money industries that are exploiting animals and causing animals to suffer in industrial farms and killing them. And if you're trying to consume also more ethical products, perhaps that came from growers who get a fair return for their coffee or whatever other products it might be. I do think that ethical consumption is an important step. But, you know, maybe you can start to do a little more in terms of supporting some of the organizations that are recommended by GiveWell or the Life You Can Save. The director of the Life You Can Save, who I should say is an unpaid director, in fact, I tell him he's on negative salary because he's also a major donor to the organization as well as working for free. So he had a background in psychology before he went into business and made some money, and then decided that wasn't in accordance with his values, and that's why he took up this position. But in psychology, he was an advocate of the idea of people setting a standard and then trying to improve on it. It's like if you jog, right? You might jog around a certain distance and you time yourself, and you might say, oh, today I did that in 12 minutes. That's the best time I've done. And then you go out other days and you see whether you can do it in 11 minutes, something like that. You set a new personal best standard. So his recommendation is, if you're not sure about how much you want to give, well, just start giving a modest amount, and then if you're comfortable with that, say, okay, so next month or next year, whether you're giving, I can do better than that. I can give more. And eventually you'll get to a level that hopefully is more significant, but that you've gradually got used to and got comfortable with.
Thank you very much. Donc, je vais peut-être repasser en français pour juste une petite conclusion. On arrive à la fin de la conférence. Merci beaucoup pour vos 3 questions, malheureusement, mais surtout à Alé et à Thibaut pour leurs questions très intéressantes qui ont permis de rentrer dans beaucoup plus de détails dans les fondements philosophiques derrière la pensée de Peter Singer et les nuances de l'altruisme efficace. Merci beaucoup à Peter Singer, bien sûr, pour votre intervention passionnante. J'espère que ça vous aura offert un avant-goût de ce que peut être la lecture de ce livre, L'altruisme efficace, qu'on est très content d'avoir en français. Et d'ailleurs, pour ceux que ça intéresse, juste après la fin de la conférence, vous aurez accès à une vente de livres et une séance de dédicace par Peter Singer ici même. Voilà, donc n'hésitez pas, c'est le moment de vous procurer votre copie dédicacée de l'altruisme efficace. Avant de vous laisser, je voudrais peut-être revenir juste en quelques mots sur peut-être les conclusions ou les messages principaux qui ont pu émerger de cette discussion, en tout cas les choses que moi je veux mettre en valeur. Je ne sais pas si c'est la même chose qui vous aura frappé vous. Pour moi, ce qui ressort particulièrement de la conférence d'aujourd'hui, c'est la grande diversité d'idées qui peut exister au sein de l'altruisme efficace. On a beaucoup de questions philosophiques, de questionnements très profond et intéressant, en tout cas moi je trouve, autour des fondements philosophiques de l'altruisme efficace. On a aussi des réflexions sur les données empiriques, des types de données qu'on peut obtenir et comment est-ce qu'on peut savoir à quelle organisation donner par des informations sur la qualité de l'intervention, sur combien de personnes, combien d'individus peuvent être aidés grâce à cette intervention. On a aussi de ces types de réflexions sur les données et sur les fondements philosophiques. On a une grande diversité, peut-être que c'est apparu aujourd'hui, qu'on a une grande diversité de causes qu'on peut potentiellement soutenir. On a quand même parlé de différentes maladies qui peuvent être adressées par des organisations, par des associations qu'on considère comme efficaces, mais aussi différents types d'individus, des animaux, des humains, et puis comme le mentionnait Olivier au début, des individus aussi dans le long terme, avec la prévention de risques catastrophiques globaux. Voilà. Et puis on peut rajouter à cette diversité une multitude de moyens, des moyens financiers, des moyens humains en termes de carrière, en termes de bénévolat, mais aussi on peut penser à des ressources en termes d'influence politique ou de compétences, de mise à service de nos compétences, de nos réseaux de contacts qu'on peut mettre au service de causes. Voilà. Donc moi, ça c'est vraiment ce que j'ai envie qui ressorte aussi de cette réflexion sur l'altruisme efficace, c'est cette grande diversité de façons de penser et pas une seule série de réponses très claires à comment allouer ces ressources. Ça c'est à la fois un peu compliqué parce que ça fait se poser des questions en permanence plutôt que d'avoir des réponses très claires, mais c'est aussi, il me semble, vraiment fascinant, et pour les personnes qui souhaitent se poser ces questions, qui s'intéressent à ces idées et souhaitent contribuer leurs idées, c'est une grande richesse. Nous, en France, on souhaite offrir un espace de coopération et de coordination pour faire réfléchir à ces idées, pas seulement transmettre de l'information, faire un peu de transmission d'information et un petit peu de réflexion avec vous sur ces idées. Et concrètement, vous êtes absolument bienvenus pour rejoindre notre communauté, notre mouvement en France de l'altruisme efficace, notamment en adhérant à l'association. Voilà, donc les membres de l'association peuvent avoir accès à des ateliers qui approfondissent, qui reviennent sur le type de questions qui ont été abordées aujourd'hui, qui vont plus en détail sur le type de questions qui sont abordées dans le livre de Peter Singer et qui permettent de réfléchir aussi individuellement à votre carrière, vos choix, vos dons, de challenger un petit peu vos idées et les nôtres et d'arriver et de s'engager davantage pour aider les autres. Pour les personnes ici qui souhaitent approfondir ces idées, on vous conseille évidemment aussi donc, de lire le livre de Peter Singer et idéalement de regarder les vidéos de Monsieur Phi pour en apprendre plus sur la philo et de lire pour développer le côté scientifique. On pense qu'en France, il n'y a pas tellement de choses qui existent que ça sur ce genre d'idées qui permettent d'avoir une bonne base de connaissances et de réflexion. Donc on vous remercie beaucoup pour l'existence, pour la mise... pour la mise à disposition de ces idées, et on vous encourage vivement, si vous ne le faites pas déjà, à aller regarder. Voilà, donc petit mot pratique final. N'oubliez surtout pas, s'il vous plaît, de ramener vos casques là où vous les avez trouvés. Voilà, il y a toujours des gens qui oublient les casques et c'est vraiment problématique pour nous. Merci de les ramener. Et puis voilà, accès à la séance de dédicace.